Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are presented, as we always are, by Full Press Coverage, which has tons of great stuff for you to check out, besides just this podcast, which should be your priority. But there's other great stuff there, too. And we were treated yesterday, Sap, to a bunch more NBA games. Our zigzag did pretty well, I think.
No, your picks did very well, Jet.
My
My
pick, well,
zigzag.
I knew that was going to happen, Sap. Come
Well,
on.
I'm here to compliment you. You were 2-1 against the spread last night. Zigzag, which it's taken out of my hands. You know, I've dumbed it down to just looking back to the prior game. Whoever covered that particular game will not cover the next one. The night before was 3-0. Last night it was 0-3. That happens in zigzagging. So far in the postseason, 6-5 against the spread. That's 55%. If you continue on that path, that's pretty good. You'll make money doing that. But we'll get to tonight's games and see if zigzag gets hot again.
But I'm better against the spread than the zigzag.
So far, yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You were 3-0 the night before. You were 2-1 last night. You said the Lakers would cover, and you said that Denver would win at Portland. We were both wrong with Miami and Milwaukee. Milwaukee just blew their
we'll get
doors
into
out.
that in a little bit. But yeah, man, were we wrong? But yeah, man, Sap, I'm scorching hot.
You are.
People should listen to me for their NBA picks,
Right.
and you know, all teams should listen to me when I'm evaluating their rosters. Hint, hint, Celtics. Sap, the past couple of days, we've spent talking a lot about race relations in regards to the NBA, and then, you know, sort of going city by city. This was all spurred by, obviously, Kyrie Irving's post-game press conference comments talking about that he hopes there's no racism or subtle racism, as he put it, when he comes back to Boston. We initially said, you know, this is Kyrie putting up a shield because he's going to get booed. I still believe that is exactly what happened. And he knows what he's doing in regards to setting up a conversation before it even happens. But then we did see the incidents in New York and Philadelphia with a fan spitting on Trae Young and a fan dumping popcorn on Russell Westbrook's head. And so, you know, it's not a conversation you can run away from. It is alive and well, racism. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. So obviously, a lot of people around the NBA have been asked about this question, specifically about Boston. People with ties to Boston have. Danny Ainge does his radio hit in the city. I think he does it. Was he do it every week, Sap? Every couple of
Every
weeks?
week, every Thursday with Toucher and Rich on the Sports Hub. And it's really good because those guys aren't afraid to ask tough questions, and Danny generally dances around them. I think yesterday when he was answering these questions, he was on a golf course, which maybe isn't the right look. You know, you're the president of basketball operations, your team is down 2-0, and you're on the golf course, you know, a day before game 3, although what's he supposed to do? I mean, unless he could work a miracle, the Celtics are going to get swept out of this series. But that's never a great look for Danny, who, by the way, I think has done a good job here, not a great job as the person running basketball operations. But the last 2 years, he does appear to be checked out a bit. And again, I think it coincides with him suffering a second heart attack 2 years ago. Remember, during the postseason, the Milwaukee series, he suffered another episode. And I think since then, he's kind of checked out, which leads me to believe that in the offseason, Wick Grossbeck's going to have to make some move. Maybe you promote Danny Ainge to the point, kind of like the Denver Broncos did with John Elway, where he's really not running things day to day. It's kind of like a prestige position. And then you get someone who does the grunt work under him, and he's there as kind of the consigliere for, you know, advice that you can obviously ignore at some point.
Right.
But I think Ainge checked out 2 years ago. I really do. And I think, you know, you can kind of feel that competitiveness isn't quite there because he's got maybe more things on his mind than if the Celtics are advancing in the playoffs. I think he's more concerned with his health, as he should be.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a large degree of, not that he doesn't care outright, but that he doesn't want it as much, and you know, it's not as motivated, and that does happen, especially when you're at the same job, you know, for a long period of time. So Danny Ainge was asked about Kyrie Irving's comments and asked about you know, what he's heard from players, because like I just said, he's been here for a while now. He played in Boston, and I think has been with the team for a total of 26 years.
26 years, right? 8 as a player and 18 as its chief executive.
So he was asked about Kyrie's comments, and this is what he had to say. I think that we take those kinds of things seriously. I have never heard any of that from any player that I've ever played with in my 26 years in Boston. I never heard that from Kyrie, and I talked to him quite a bit. So I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter. We're just playing basketball. Players can say what they want. So the problem with this, and obviously he prefaced it by saying we take this very seriously, which of course the Celtics do, and the Celtics have, if you're grading teams' race relations, they have an A+ as an
Mhm.
organization. They you can't have a better reputation than the Celtics do when it comes to an organization and how they've dealt with racism. Uh, they've been, since basically their founding, top notch. But the city
We
of
don't know
Boston.
about recently, though. We don't know about recently because if they're tone deaf to this, then they're not doing their job, right? I mean, if these are concerns with players and somehow Danny Ainge isn't hearing this, well, that's on him or Brad Stevens. And to just talk about what Danny Ainge was as a player, he was a feisty guy, right? So he would be a villain on the road and a hero at the old Boston Garden. He did play in 3 finals against the Lakers in 84, 85, and 87. I'm assuming he heard some racial bullshit during those finals because I was there and I heard it, and I was just covering it. I wasn't a player on the court and I wasn't close to fans like he probably was because there was a lot of racial tension when the Lakers and Celtics played in the finals. The Lakers were considered the black team. The Celtics were considered the white team because their best player was white. The Lakers' best players were all black. And there was a lot of racial tension back there in the 80s. But again, that was 35 years ago. I think everybody kind of like let it go over their head and maybe forget about it a little bit because we weren't as sensitive as we are now. But for Danny Ainge to come out and say that in 26 years with the Celtics, he never heard of this. I think that's being insincere and tone deaf.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying there, Sap. In terms of the him playing and not hearing it, I do think some players just are so focused on the game that they don't even hear anything around them. I'm not saying that that's necessarily Danny Ainge, but I
Mhm.
do think that you're not paying attention sometimes to what people are yelling, especially in those Lakers games. If it's a finals game, I don't know that you're focused on anything but the game. But that has nothing really to do with this because really, Sap, the issue is that one of his own players, Marcus Smart, said
Right.
he had an incident, and he actually put out a piece months ago about an incident that happened outside of the Garden. It didn't happen during a game with a woman at a. We talked about this the other day, Sap. At a, was it a traffic stop or something like
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
where she yelled the N word to him.
Hmm.
He's said now that Marcus Smart has been asked further about this and said he has heard stuff at Celtics games. So yeah, it's a bad look for Danny Ainge to be saying one thing while one of his own players is saying the other thing. And Marcus Smart, loves is Mr. Boston, loves Boston, has a T-shirt from his own T-shirt company that says "I love Boston,
Hmm.
Boston loves me." So I don't think he has anything against the city or anything like that. He's
No,
just speaking his truth.
the thing with that is, and Marcus Smart posted this in the Players Tribune back in October, and then he accompanied it with a video which he posted on Instagram. And I remember reading the piece on the Players Tribune and watching the video that he put forth on Instagram. This was back in October, so I saw it, and I'm just whatever the hell I am, a provocateur or whatever you want to call us. We do podcasting, and occasionally I'll write columns. I'm not in there covering the games like I used to. Now, the Celtics have to do their due diligence with this stuff, right? So if this is 2021 now, if you're running a basketball organization or any pro sports team or any major college sports team, you have to have someone within your organization who monitors your players' social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever it may be, and also be aware that one of your players posted something on the Players Tribune. This wasn't just a blog. The Players Tribune, carries some cachet, right? I mean, it was founded by Derek Jeter. People will go to that to read pieces because they're written by the player, maybe with some assistance, maybe not, but they're authentic and they're raw. No one in the Celtics organization knew that Marcus Smart posted this in the Players Tribune or had an Instagram post, a video version of it. They have to have someone doing that, whether it's in the communications department, media relations. Hell, I don't care. Have an intern, and their only job is just monitor the players' Twitter handles, Facebook, Instagram, and just see what's being said by the players or about the players. I'm not saying you have to go all like the Stasi in East Germany back in the 70s and 80s where you're monitoring these guys 24/7. No, I'm not saying that, but you have to understand what these guys are going through. The commissioner of basketball last year said, I don't know why so many of my players are so unhappy. You would think they have a great life playing basketball, make a lot of money, a lot of adulation from fans. A lot of it has to do with social media, that the likes of Kevin Durant's constantly fighting with people on social media. And he's not the only one. There are other players. It's just that he's the most visible one. That's a bad look for the Celtics. They've got to be more proactive with this. I'm not saying Danny Ainge has to follow the players on Twitter or Brad Stevens. Hell no, they're busy doing other things. In Ainge's case, hitting the links. But someone in the organization has to be charged with monitoring what's going on with the players so that they can nip it in the bud. Once that piece came out in the Players Tribune, someone in the higher ups of the Celtics, whether it was Wick Grossbeck, Danny Ainge, Brad Stevens, someone higher up had to have approached Marcus Smart and say, Marcus, let us know when this happened. Let's try to rectify this, and let's get that message out there that we do not tolerate this. I think they were tone deaf, and I think Danny Ainge was very tone deaf when he was on Toucher and Rich just yesterday. It was a horrible look, to the point, Jet, where I'm going to go maybe hyperbolic on this. If I'm Wick Grossbeck and they lose the next two games in blowout fashion and Kyrie Irving sticks it in their eye and puts up 42 points, Wick Grossbeck's going to have to sit down, which is a very likely scenario. Although the part of Kyrie Irving scoring 42, I won't buy into, because I don't think he's going to really feed off of being booed in game 3 and then in game 4 at full capacity. But if that happens and it's a bad look for the Celtics and they're like the least competitive team in the postseason, and then all of this is taking place and no one, reacted to what Marcus Smart wrote just, 7 months ago, this could cost Danny Ainge's job. I think if Wick Grossbeck looks at this and says, man, this guy's just not with it right now, he's not all in, I'm not going to fire him. I'm going to promote him to, czar of basketball, or do what they did with Red Auerbach when Rick Pitino came. They just gave him a fancy title and get someone else to run the basketball operation. And it may even impact Brad Stevens, because this, besides the team looking like it's just absolutely quit on the coach, now it looks like the organization is just not connecting with the players. That's a real problem.
Yeah, I completely get what you're saying, and I agree that it's definitely tone deaf. The only thing I'll push back on is I have no idea what goes on, day to day, and that somebody may have approached Marcus Smart right after it came out and said something to him. Just because Danny Ainge is unaware of this doesn't mean that the entire organization is unaware of this. There's a lot of people that work for the Celtics, and it's not just Danny Ainge. So, I think that there's a strong chance Ainge was just unaware of this, and which is a terrible look. But I don't necessarily know that means Wick Grossbeck was, or that Mike Zarin was, or that, Jeff Twists or Rich Gotham were unaware
Brad
of this
Stevens.
situation.
Brad Stevens kind of dismissed this too on his weekly hit. But
yeah, that's
Brad
true.
Stevens was on with Zolak and Bertrand, also on the Sports Hub, and said, "Oh, I don't really, hear any of these things." His own player wrote a piece in the Players Tribune and then posted something on Instagram. We all saw it, Jet, and we're not employees of the Boston Celtics, and we reacted to it. And yet, here's the organization kind of either denying it or not remembering it, or just brushing it off as, "Oh, that's just Marcus Smart. He's an emotional guy. Let's just carry on." It's not a very, very good look. And again, you have to have a chain of command where it goes closer to the top than the bottom. Go back 10 years ago with what happened at Penn State, and you got Joe Paterno saying, I knew nothing about what was going on. Well, a guy who's in charge is going to get the credit when things go well, but he's also going to get the blame when things don't go well. Same thing in Foxborough. When things go wrong, it's Bill Belichick's fault and ultimately Robert Kraft's fault. You can't just run away from it and say, I didn't know. It's your job to put people in place that let you know when serious things happen. And this did not happen in the case of Marcus Smart.
Yeah, I think they look at it as a situation where, someone like Wick Grossbeck, who owns the team, is like, well, this incident, happened outside the Garden. Like, how can I really control what happens outside the Garden? The best I could do is kick out a fan or ban a fan when it happens, in the arena that, we lease, not own. So, maybe there's some sort of a disconnect there, Sap. But yeah, obviously the big takeaway is that no matter how you slice it, it's a bad look for the organization, because they look either willfully ignorant or just ignorant of what's going on.
Right.
And in either way, that's not good. And I could. I don't think it's going to cost Danny Ainge's job because I can't see anything getting him fired or demoted, or even if you want to call it a fake promotion. I think for Wick Grossbeck, it would be like doing that to his father. So I don't. I think he's too close with Danny Ainge to do anything other than, unless Danny Ainge is willing to take a step back and take a step down, then it's not going to happen, which is unfortunate because he's shown no signs of being able to turn this thing around. And this obviously is a bad look. So this is a lot of things coupled. I think it's a really dark time for the Celtics, Sab. I don't know how they're going to recruit free agents. I don't know how they're going to get out of this mess that they're in right now, roster wise, with Danny Ainge at the helm. They have a white head coach, which is, that's most of the league, but still, it's with this situation, it doesn't look great. And a white GM. It's just they need to make culture changes, and maybe culture changes is getting younger and more diverse. With their coaching staff, with their front office, whatever. It's just I'm honestly, Seth, I'm like depressed about the whole situation because it's my favorite team. It's a team that I've grown up loving, and I can't remember a more bleak outlook for the team.
Yeah, I mean, look, the first year of the Bridgies, they made it into the playoffs and they got swept by LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. But you felt good about that year. They lost by an average of 10 points per game against a team that ultimately went to the NBA Finals. At that point, they had Kyrie Irving playing with LeBron James, and that was also a series that Kevin Love got hurt, ended up separating his shoulder and missing the rest of the postseason. But after that series, even though you got swept, you're like, that was pretty cool. Give them credit. They're well coached. They're intense. They're competitive. This feels worse than 2 years ago when at least that team won one series, right? They beat Philadelphia in the first round and then ultimately lost to the Milwaukee Bucks in 5 games.
Indiana,
and then
I think, was it?
They beat Indiana. You're right. Indiana. It was Philadelphia the year before and the year after. They swept Indiana and won game one against Milwaukee. And you're like, okay, we're off to a good start against Milwaukee. And then the Bucks blew them out the next 4 games. And Kyrie kind of, pooped on your parade and he decided to move on. And Al Horford decided to move on. And everything just kind of splintered from that point going forward. So this is, a downtime because the team doesn't look competitive, doesn't look like they're bought in, doesn't look like they even care to play defense. Look, you can be beaten by the Brooklyn Nets, which is not going to surprise any of us, but at least make Brooklyn work a little bit. And that hasn't been the case in this series, other than parts of game one where Brooklyn looked disinterested. Once Brooklyn got interested, it was lights out. So, this is a downtime. And then, all of those great draft picks they had are now gone. So they can't hope for a top 5 pick, which they were able to get in the Garnett trade to Brooklyn, and then yielded them Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Great. They're not going to be able to do that. And again, what free agents are coming here? They signed 2, I'd say, second-tier free agents when they brought in Al Horford and Gordon Hayward, and both left. Right? Yeah. Neither one wanted to say and sign another contract. Kemba Walker they got, and look, that may be one of the worst contracts in all of basketball. So you probably couldn't even give him away in the offseason. It's terrible. It's roster mismanagement by Danny Ainge, and this thing is just more to pile on. That I think if Wick Grossbeck is going to be proactive, and I'm not saying panic, but proactive, maybe you promote Danny Ainge. You still pay him handsomely, and he's kind of like, like Red Auerbach was when Rick Pitino came here in the late 90s. But get someone on the job who can do the due diligence, who's going to work the phones and create relationships with other executives. And it can't be Mike Zarens and it can't be Austin Ainge, because then that feels incestuous to me. Look, we both want Masai Ujiri here, right? I mean, he to me is the best executive in the NBA. To win a title in Toronto is pretty awesome, right? I mean, like no one ever expected the Raptors to win an NBA championship. The only thing is, I don't think Masai Ujiri's coming here with Danny Ainge still involved. Masai Ujiri would be the guy. If you can go out and get him, go do it and let Ainge retire peacefully. It's going to cost you a lot of money to get Masai Ujiri. He'll be one of the highest paid executives in all of sports, but I think he's worth it. He can change the culture here. And then you bring in a coach that maybe relates to players better than Brad Stevens, who, doesn't seem to connect right now with his 2-star players.
It's a mess, and it doesn't seem like ownership is it cares enough to fit.
Mhm.
Like I said, Sap, it's bleak. It's really bleak, and it's unfortunate. Look, to me, that the most stark thing is all the teams that have passed you by. This team
Yeah.
you're playing right now that's passed you by. Philadelphia has passed you by. Obviously, the Lakers have, well since passed you by. They won a championship last year. All these teams that you were, laughing at just a couple of years ago. People Celtics fan are laughing out. Ben Simmons can't shoot. We beat the Sixers every time that we play them. Well, they've passed you by. The Nets, you buried that franchise. Nope, they've passed you by. The Bucks, a couple of years ago with the Isaiah Thomas team, you beat them. You're thinking, Giannis can't get anything done. Well, they've passed you. They've more than since passed you by. Uh, it's just
How about
all these
Atlanta
teams.
and New York, two teams that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
laughed at
Atlanta
for
and
a
New York,
decade?
Sep,
Yeah, Atlanta has
completely.
Trae Young. That's a great foundation piece, and they've got their coach in place, provided they give him an extension, which I think they should give Nate McMillan. I think he's in contention for Coach of the Year, although he wasn't a finalist, which kind of surprised me. But there's a lot of guys that are deserving of being a finalist for that award. And the Knicks, they're building something there. I don't know how long it's going to last because I don't think Tom Thibodeau is a guy who's going to stay in a place for a long time. I think he just wears on people. It's kind of the Buck Showalter of the NBA. Like he shows up and gets the most out of what he has, but then after a few years, players start to tune him out. I think
Yeah, at
that could
some
be the
point their
case in New
owner
York.
will fuck it
He'll
up.
screw it up too. Yeah, I
Right.
know. But you've only won one more championship than the Knicks. In the last 35 years. So let's not shit on all these franchises that are poorly run. But yeah, something's going to have to be done. And you just get the feeling that you got game 3 tonight, game 4 on Sunday. Sunday is going to be a full house, and they're going to be focused on booing Kyrie Irving, and rightfully so. And like Kyrie said earlier in the week, let's hope it doesn't turn into belligerence or racism or anti-religion. Let's hope that the fans stay away from that, because there's been plenty of fans in other NBA cities that are kind of, picking up this narrative by acting like assholes as well, not to mention Philadelphia and New York, but also in Utah, which is no surprise because Utah has problems with race relations as well. And I know you want to talk about that briefly. But yeah, this is a bad look for the Celtics, and especially if they lose both of these games by 20 plus points, and Brooklyn makes it look like it's the Globetrotters against the Washington Generals. That is going to be a bad look, because these games are high profile games. These are like standalone games that we're seeing. I believe ABC has tonight's game, and Sunday it's in a prime spot. So because you got two major markets, a historic franchise, and a team everybody wants to watch in Brooklyn. So this could be very embarrassing for the Celtics. I would just give Kyrie the cold shoulder, the silent treatment. But that's
Yeah,
me.
but that's not going to happen. Listen, fans have
No,
been waiting to boo him for a
no.
while, and I think they should boo him. But
Yep,
he's already changed the narrative to,
he
if they're
has.
booing him, it's racist. Which it. There may be some fans who are booing him
Or
because they're racist. I think 99% of them are booing him because he the way he left, and he's buried this team, Sep. This has all
who?
started with him. He has buried them, and he should be public enemy number one, between the way he left and screwing up the whole Danny Ainge vision of him and AD. And that's shame on Danny Ainge for only having one plan there. And now this, he's reinstituted this narrative and all this discussion again. Now Danny Ainge looks bad. The organization looks bad. Man, Kyrie has just buried this team. He must hate the Celtics something fierce, Sap.
The Celtics need an exorcism at this point to rid themselves of Kyrie Irving. It feels like The Exorcist, right? You've got, you get that wicked spirit inside of you that you want to have out. Yeah, because when he came here, I remember the original press conference. It's like Kyrie, Gordon Hayward. You had drafted Jaylen Brown the year before, Jason Tatum that particular year. You had some other nice pieces, Marcus Smart and Al Horford, and then you signed a nice piece in Marcus Morris. You had a really good roster. And in the first year, you got to the conference finals without Kyrie Irving, with the game 7 against LeBron James and the Cavaliers. Going into the next year, the Celtics were the favorites to win the Eastern Conference, because they'd
Right.
gone to game 7 against Cleveland with Kyrie Irving not playing. Now you're going to have him the next year. You just assumed, well, they're going to take care of business. And they ended up losing in the second round to Milwaukee. And really, I know they got to the conference finals last year. And most people think they lost to an inferior team in Miami. You can have that debate. I think those two teams are pretty equal, as we've seen this year, that neither one has made a dent in the playoffs. They're probably both going to get swept at this point. But, you had an opportunity maybe to get to the finals. It seems to be more of an anomaly than a norm. And this year, look, 7 seed. This is what happens with 7 seeds generally in the NBA playoffs, unless you're the Los Angeles Lakers, who are still the favorites in their conference, despite being a 7 seed. But the Celtics look like a team that shouldn't even made the playoffs. I mean, we kind of talked about that in the play-in game, like just lose to Washington and then lose to whoever else. It would have been Indiana in that case, and get into the lottery and you get the 14th pick, which you screw up anyway with Romeo Langford, and we'll see about Aaron Nesmith, how he turns out going forward. But it's not a good spot to be in. And if they just roll back with Ainge and Stevens and the same coaching staff and make minimal moves to the roster, then if I'm a Celtics fan, I go, what the hell's the point here? I'm not going to get invested, because they're not invested. Look at the ratings, Jet. The TV ratings. The Celtics this year, or in this postseason, averaging a 2.7 in their playoff games. The Bruins, meanwhile, averaging a 4.2. And the Bruins have a legitimate chance to win a Stanley Cup. But the Bruins right now are more popular than the Celtics by a pretty marginal size in terms of TV ratings and excitement in the city, because they do have a chance to win a championship. I think that has a lot to do with it. But the Celtics have not been a good product really since the first 2 weeks of the season.
No, and it doesn't seem to bother Wick Grousbeck or Danny
Right.
Ainge, as far as I could tell. I mean, I think Brad Stevens, it bothers him, but I think he's part of the problem. So
right. Yeah, it's a different reaction than what you'll see in LA with Steve Ballmer, who may fire the coach for a second straight year, may decide to trade Paul George, may get rid of Jerry West. I mean, he's going to overreact, Steve Ballmer. The Celtics probably will underreact, even if that's a word. You know what I'm saying? They'll probably just sit back and say, that's what's going to happen. They're going to say, yeah, with COVID and Jaylen Brown, and like, you could have had Jaylen Brown and 3 other stars. You're not beating Brooklyn. I mean, the rosters are obviously there's a gap between the 2 rosters, so they need a lot of work to do. They're the 7th or 8th team in the Eastern Conference right now. Atlanta and the Knicks are better. We're seeing that in the postseason. At least they're out there playing defense and busting their ass, and they look like they're into it. The Celtics look like, when is this ending? Like, Jason Tatum may have tea time for Monday because Game 4 is Sunday, and they're going to get swept.
Yeah, and the last thing I want to say about the Celtics, Sap, is that I see this is the narrative that the media is building, and it's they had to come up with some way to write this off, because they circled the wagons for the Celtics, and that it's, well, Brooklyn's basically unbeatable. When they have these 3 guys are healthy, no one can beat them anyways. So no shame for the Celtics losing to this team. It's like, no, they wouldn't have. That's not an excuse that there's a really good team. You're getting your asses kicked by them. You be that really good team, not, well, Brooklyn's great. No one's beating them. That's not something that should make you feel good about where the Celtics are. But that's the narrative that the media is writing. Yeah, this Brooklyn team was pretty much unbeatable. Well, whatever. It is what it is. We lost to an unbeatable team. Beat the unbeatable team.
Or your best player, Jason Tatum, at least take the challenge of Kevin Durant. You're not as good as Kevin Durant. You're never going to be as good as Kevin Durant, but at least, try to guard him, try to score on him. I mean, those matchups have been one-sided to the point where Durant's, I think, probably laughing at Jason Tatum at this point. And Tatum still has room to grow. I get that. But you know what? He's in his 4th year. This is his 4th straight year in the postseason. Accept the challenge. Show a higher compete level. That's the thing about the Celtics. They haven't even competed in most of this series.
No, at all. And Sap, we'll briefly allude to it the other day. There was an incident in Utah. This seems to happen, a good amount in Utah. It's not surprising. It's probably the whitest NBA city going.
Yeah, I checked the numbers. 2% of the population in Salt Lake City is black. So that's by far the lowest of any NBA city. Not even close to whoever's the closest.
And it was an incident with Ja Morant's family, who was in attendance for the game. Some racial talk, some inappropriate language, and the fans, rightly so, were kicked out and banned from Jazz games. And the same day, actually, remember there was an incident with Russell Westbrook a few years ago with Jazz fans, and they were banned and kicked out, and they actually countersued the Jazz for $100 million, which is ridiculous, and saying, you've caused us emotional distress and blah, 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 blah. And that got thrown out by a judge, rightfully so, because it was, what's the word for
frivolous lawsuit?
Frivolous. Thank
frivolous.
You, Seth. Completely frivolous. By definition, they should put that one in the legal textbooks. That's a definition of a frivolous lawsuit.
Make them pay for court charges. That's a way to get rid of frivolous lawsuits.
That's a good point, Sep.
Yeah.
And so this continues to happen, and it's gonna. I don't know what the NBA could do about it other than what they're doing, which is if it happens, catch the people, shame the people, kick the people out, ban them. Period. I don't know what else they can really do.
No, it's not like, with COVID, you have to bring your vaccination card, because that's what they're talking about for Game 5 in New York, that 10% of the people that were at Madison Square Garden in games 1 and 2 were not vaccinated. They want to see proof of vaccination for Game 5 between the Knicks and the Hawks. So you can bring in a card and say, I'm vaccinated,
Yeah, that'll
so I'm
go over
safe to
well.
be here. But you can't do that when it comes to racism. We can have a questionnaire for every person that comes in, or have a lie detector test and
hug
see if
this
they're
black
racist.
person, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, who's your favorite president? If you don't answer Obama, then you're a racist, which is absurd. You don't have to. You can dislike President Obama. I didn't. I love President Obama, but you can dislike him and not be a racist. I mean, but there are people that didn't like him because they were racist.
Right.
It's complicated.
Name 5 black celebrities. That's
Right.
the
Yeah,
question.
exactly. Yeah, Chris Rock, Denzel Washington, and we'll go on from there. But you can't legislate that. So look, there's 20,000 people in the stands on a given night. I know with the pandemic, I haven't kept track of exactly every stadium, what they're doing in terms of numbers.
Yeah, they're all
Look,
different.
all different numbers. I mean, Sunday night at TD Garden, there's going to be 18,000 people there. I'm assuming some of them are racist, but are they going to push forth that narrative vocally at the players? That's what you have to see happen. I also researched one thing about Salt Lake City. I just wanted to make sure, and I wasn't trying to be flip or funny or whatever. They do serve alcohol at Utah Jazz games through the third quarter. So just like any other NBA arena, fans can get shit-faced. And that happens, which is kind of a truth serum for people. All of a sudden,
true, but they're also
empowered.
A lot of them are Mormon, and Mormons typically don't imbibe.
Yeah, I mean, I think the real
right, Ainge doesn't drink. Mitt Romney doesn't drink.
No, but I'm
Those
sure
are only 2 Mormons I know off the top of my head.
There's not a lot of. Yeah, that's about. Jim McMahon was a Mormon. He definitely drank. The former quarterback of the Bears at BYU. In fact, when he was at BYU, they hated him because he was like, passed out on the professor's lawn, shit-faced, and they're like, this guy's the BU quarterback. He can't act like that. But there's also non-Mormons in Salt Lake City. So I don't know. If they're serving beer, they must be selling it. So I'm just thinking that, some fans get liquored up and they decide to attack John Morant's family and start using the N-word and some sexual deviance. So that's not good. And again, we're not hearing all about how racist Salt Lake City is. The thing with Salt Lake City is because only 2% of the population is black, you probably don't hear a lot of stories about it because there's not as many people to offend as, like Northeast cities or a city like Detroit, which has a majority black population, where there's going to be more incidents because there's more black people. So, the same
and
thing
the 2% sap is the Utah Jazz. That's what.
And then the players on the Jazz, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's what makes
about
up the
Donovan Mitchell
and
if say his parents moved there to support him. Yeah, it's not a heavily black community, and isn't this the place where Michael Jordan got poisoned in the NBA Finals? I mean, we hear about
allegedly.
The flu game. Allegedly, it was the flu game. He had food poisoning. He was shit-faced, whatever it may be. Could you imagine if a black player got poisoned in Boston? It would be tied to race. But Michael Jordan got poisoned
in the city, and
they would
send us into the ocean.
But it happened in Salt Lake City. And it was like, well, it was just kind of this rogue pizza guy who may have coughed on the pizza. I don't even know. The story has been retold so many times. I don't think anybody knows what the case is. Some say he was drunk or hungover. Some say he was poisoned. Others say whatever. But you get my point. If that happened here, it'd be like, I can't believe this happened in Boston. Someone poisoned a player. And look, Boston's had its issues for decades. We know that. Well publicized. But why, as we said yesterday, why in Philadelphia someone throwing popcorn on Russell Westbrook is fans misbehaving, or a fan in the front row or the second row from the court spits at Trae Young? That's fan misbehaving. But when it happens in Boston, it's racial.
Right. I heard somebody ask Adam Jones, who's not the baseball player, the radio host here in Boston, that pretty much same question, Sap, and Adam Jones just flippantly said, because it's worse here.
I was listening to that, and I agree with Adam Jones on a lot of things. I didn't agree with them on that. You have to go a little deeper than that. That's a simple answer to just say it's worse here. Have we all been to every city? I mean, I haven't. I don't think anybody has. I'd like to maybe you could talk to sports writers who covered teams that have gone to a lot of different cities. I mean, I'd like to, maybe bend the ear of someone like Bob Ryan, who's covered sports for 50 years and been to every city in America, and see what the vibe is in other cities. To just blatantly say, well, it's just worse here. Well, that's just a blanket statement with it may be true, but it is kind of lazy. And again, I do like Adam Jones a lot. I think he and Christian Arcan, a friend of ours who we work together, you at
Yeah.
EEI
Oh
and me
yeah.
at Boston Herald Radio, I think they do a fantastic job. But I can't agree with them on that. I think it's a little deeper than that. See, that's the thing about this. We were texting back and forth, and I was also texting back and forth with my nephew, who actually is more liberal than you. You guys would get along great. But he, obviously in this endeavor is going to pretty much believe Kyrie Irving, kind of support him, and actually we're going out to breakfast on Sunday, and I don't want to go back and forth on texting. It's too complicated. That's what I told him. It's very complicated. I said we'll talk about this Sunday. You can't text back and forth.
Right.
A
Well,
debate.
it's the same saying, Sep. It's worse here is the same as saying the people go, it's better here. It's not one way
Right.
or the other. You
Yeah.
can't just say, well, we're a liberal city, so it's not bad here, or
Right.
nah, it's worse in Boston. Like you said, Sep, it's more nuanced. It's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
It very well may be worse. It very well may be better. I don't think there's a definitive way to say that one way or the other.
Yeah. I mean, there was subtle racism, but that happens everywhere. And I think, look, if it was anyone but Kyrie Irving that said what he said the other night, this would be even a deeper conversation. Because it's Kyrie Irving, sometimes you shoot the messenger. And I think what he had to say, some of those things were accurate. Subtle racism, that's a difficult one, to the point where everyone has to be politically correct. Like there's a certain way that you talk to black people that you kind of leave certain words out, right? Like if you're talking to a black person, a black man, you never use the term boy. You just don't,
Yeah,
right?
and that's what happened in Utah.
And that's what happens. That's what happens with people. And maybe they're racist, maybe they're ignorant, and sometimes those two things are the same thing, or
Yeah.
maybe they're just tone deaf. And a lot of this can be generational. You just don't use certain words. Or even I have black friends, I don't refer to them as brother. Right.
Right.
And,
Or Mike,
I'll say that
I
to you
think
at the end of the
generational is a good
podcast.
point, though, Sap, too.
It is
Like
generational, and I'm older, so I'm trying to learn. I learn a lot from people like you, or my nephew, or my man Chris Villani, and younger guys. I like to pick their brain and see what now is more acceptable than was, say, maybe when I was your age, and we're like
Sure.
28 years apart. But the whole point of that is you don't use certain terms, and you got to be careful with that. But also, you almost can end a conversation to the point where if you can't have a conversation with someone if you're thinking too much. Like,
intent
okay, I'm going to
always
say
needs to be the most
something.
important thing, though.
Exactly.
Sap.
Yeah.
Always
Yeah.
needs to be the most.
We end every
thing.
podcast with, "All right, Jed, have a great day. Talk to you later. Thanks, brother." Like, okay,
Right.
but if I'm doing that with a black man, I'm probably not going to say that. So, and I want to be sensitive to that. But there's no blatant malpractice or whatever the word is.
No,
I can't think of.
I know
If I
exactly
did
what
that,
you're saying.
say if we have Mike Molino on, who's a man of color, and I don't think Mike would be offended if I said that to him, but I want to be cognizant of that. So, but now, does that make me less comfortable talking? That's where you have to kind of work a couple of sides of the aisle, and that becomes difficult to the point. Look, there's a great episode of Seinfeld where Jerry had to be politically correct because he was dating a Native American girl, and there were certain words like reservation or whatever that he couldn't use. He just had to be careful. And then she wanted to give the tickets back. He says, "Well, you can't be I was going to say Indian giver." He couldn't use that, to the point where they couldn't have a conversation. And comedians talk about this a lot, that the cancel culture and political correctness is kind of made this difficult. And this goes back to Kyrie. If you're in that arena the next, 2 of the next 3 nights, and you boo him, that doesn't make you a racist. You're just a Celtic fan that was turned off because he screwed you at the end. So that just, let's not connect too many dots there, because again, as I told you, it's complicated. And we've spent 3 podcasts on this in the middle of the NBA playoffs. And I enjoy these conversations because I think you get to learn a lot, and maybe learn a lot about yourself as well.
Yeah, and like I said, Sap, intent is always the overriding most important part. If your intent is to not offend and you say something that's offensive, then it's a mistake. It
Right.
doesn't make you racist. If your intent is to say even if you're not using necessarily bad language, but if your intent is to, be offensive or racist to somebody, then that's the most important part. Intent is always the most important part.
Exactly.
And then the other stuff is important too. But I think if somebody's willing to learn and adapt, even if they say the wrong thing, if their intent is there to say the right thing, that's the most important thing. And
Exactly.
booing somebody, booing Kyrie, there may be some people who are booing him because he's black. I said this at the beginning, I think the vast majority, 99% of the people are booing him because he screwed the team over, not
Right.
because he's black. So
No.
he's built this narrative as to no matter what the Celtics fans do, he's going to say at the end of the game, I think there was racism. They're booing me because they're racist. Because I don't think he's a unique case. He's a unique case with this.
He is. And in general, if you're booing an NBA player, an NBA star, 9 out of 10 times you're going to be booing a black man. So, are we at the point now where you can't boo a black player because he's black? You can only boo white players, which, in the 80s, the biggest villain coming to Boston Garden was probably Bill Laimbeer. And he ate that up. He was the villain of the Detroit Pistons because he knew if he was the villain, it kind of shielded Isaiah Thomas, who was their best player. I just want to run one more story back to you.
Yeah.
Before we get into, recapping the games last night and previewing tonight's games. Johnny Carson, the king of late night. I mean, he was an icon to the point where in his heyday, he was responsible for 25% of NBC's revenue. Just think about that. 1 hour a night was responsible for 25% of the entire network's revenue. That's phenomenal. It's how popular he was. Eddie Murphy would come on, and Eddie Murphy, he was as big as Michael Jordan and as big as Michael Jackson in the mid 80s. Those were like three icons, an athlete, a musician, and a comedian. They were at the peak of their powers. And Eddie Murphy would come on, and he was the biggest movie star in Hollywood at some point. Beverly Hills Cop, Coming to America, those types of movies, which were excellent. And he was making a ton of money. And Eddie Murphy was on with Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson, who again was at that point 60-year-old white guy from mid-America. He was from Nebraska. He said, "Now, what's a cat like you going to do with all that money?" And like Eddie Murphy perfectly just went into like a black guy routine and said, "Well, I'm going to buy me some really fancy hubcaps and a big Cadillac." And he played along with it. He wasn't offended by it because he's a comedian. And his way of doing it is to be funny back at Johnny. And then by the end of it, he goes, "Johnny, you should talk. You make, $250,000 for a weekend in Vegas," which back 35 years ago was like making $2 million a weekend. So that was a good conversation. If that type of conversation happened today, someone would be canceled, and it would lead the news
fired.
saying Johnny Carson offended a black man, and then the black man offended the other guy, and it would be a huge topic. Now that's how sensitive we are. So we've got to evolve from that, but we can't evolve to the point where we can't speak to each other. And then at this point, and there's less speaking than ever before, Jet, because of technology. We don't, in the old days, if we're watching a Celtics Lakers game, we'd be watching it together or we're on the phone talking about it. Now we just text, so that's not the strongest form of communication, because times you can get lost in textlation. And especially last night when I was concerned about you because you were really angry that the Lakers were winning. I thought you may have been drunk by the third quarter, and you
Very
were
angry.
texting me that, LeBron, I'm sick of hearing about his difficult path. He's got another cakewalk to the finals, which is fine with me if that's the case. But you were very angry. I was very, very concerned last night.
Yeah, I was very angry.
Yes.
And so, Seth, the last thing I want to say is that, yes, the cancel culture part, I don't want to sound like I'm on Fox News, because I think there's good aspects of it too, that people who deserve it should be. And, that Donald Trump getting kicked off Twitter isn't cancel culture. He incited a riot.
Exactly.
That's not canceling him. He did something wrong. He paid the consequence for it. That should be the thing. But if you're saying, for something innocuous, like that conversation you just said with Johnny Carson and Eddie Murphy, if it's something like that, then there's no reason to cancel anybody over that. So then you need to find the middle ground. With all this stuff, there's nuance, and so that is lost on a lot of people, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Maher has talked about this so often, and Bill Maher is one of my favorite people to listen to, that he stopped going to college campuses. He was booed at the University of California, which is one of the most liberal universities in the country, was booed by the students because he had said something about someone, and it was
It's
just
a little
like,
out of control.
he's a comedian. He's there to make you laugh. Like, you have to suspend disbelief. I'm not saying that, you have to be guttural and start using the N-word like Michael Richards did, Kramer from Seinfeld, who we haven't heard from since, or anything like that. But let the comedians be comedians and be funny, and you have to develop your own filter and know, okay, this is just a bit they're doing, or this is fun. We don't have to cancel everybody.
Yeah. All right, Sap, let's get to the games that happened last night. Now that we've had, this conversation for the third day in a row, and who knows, maybe tomorrow we'll be talking about it too. The first game of the evening was what we thought would maybe be the best game of the evening. And in fact, it turned out to be by far the least intriguing one, as the Bucks just roll over the Miami Heat in Miami, 113-84. It wasn't even that close. And the Bucks are now up 3-0 over the team that beat them last year. And the Bucks are looking as good as they've looked all season long, Sap.
They have been as dominant against Miami as Brooklyn has been against the Celtics. And I think we both agree that Miami's better than the Celtics, because you'd normally expect some compete level with Miami. But the last two nights, the last two games, Milwaukee just obliterated the Miami Heat. And the interesting thing is here, we're both fans of Drew Holiday. You probably more than me, and you kind of introduced me to him a little bit when we were with Herald Radio. You gotta watch out for Drew Holiday. He's a winning player. He plays defense. He does everything. Do you realize in this series, the Milwaukee Bucks have outscored the Miami Heat by 65 points in 3 games? When Drew Holiday's on the court, they've outscored Miami by 88 points. When he's on the bench, Miami's actually outscored Milwaukee by 23.
Wow.
I'm not huge on plus minus. I think sometimes there's other factors, but that's pretty awesome. If you're a fan of Drew Holiday, that is. I think in the
playoffs, it's a bigger deal, Sap. Those plus minus numbers. Yep. You look for these. He's a steadying presence. He's a veteran. Yes. He's been in the league. He's been in the playoffs multiple times before. He's going to bring it on both ends of the court. So you trust him. I think Giannis had a lack of people he trusted basketball-wise. And this roster, I think he trusts. He's got the guys who he has played with before, Middleton, Lopez, who he's developed with trust over the years. Eric Bledsoe was so inconsistent that, and they got rid of him, and they got Drew Holiday, who's just a much better version of Eric Bledsoe. Bledsoe is a damn good defender too, but not as good as Drew Holiday, and he's a streaky shooter, and Holiday's more reliable. Holiday's just a better version of him all around. And then you have some of these young guys like DiVincenzo, who didn't play particularly well last night, but I think Giannis is starting to trust him more. And you have other veterans you brought in like PJ Tucker, who's going to bring it and play with full effort. Yep. It's a well-constructed team, Sap.
Give them a lot of credit. They didn't panic after losing in the second round last year. They said, okay, let's target Drew Holiday. He's going to be the kind of guy that's going to fit in with us. I was so impressed with him in game 2 when, Barnes and Connaughton were raining threes. Drew Holiday only had 11 points, but that shows me a great leader. He's like, okay, I can get out of the way, set these guys up, let them beat the opposition. I think he had 17 assists that night.
His assist numbers are great in this
He's
series.
A guy that does it all, right?
12 last night.
Yeah, so he's understanding, okay, I've got scorers now. And look, Milwaukee can shoot threes with the best of them, and that really opens up things for Giannis. Chris Middleton is an all-star caliber player. Obviously, Drew Holiday is an all-star caliber player. Look, I picked them to get to the finals. You've been high on them all year. That next series with Brooklyn, that is going to feel like a conference finals or an NBA finals.
I can't wait.
That's going to be a great series, because I think Milwaukee's showing toughness. They play defense, and who the hell is going to cover Giannis in that series? Because one thing Brooklyn doesn't have is a rim protector, which they can kind of get by with against most teams because they'll just outscore you. But no rim protector with Giannis, that could be problematic for Brooklyn.
Yeah, and Miami just has not lived up to their end of what we thought was going to be an interesting series here. Jimmy Butler played probably his best game of the series last night. He still wasn't that great, only 19 points. Adebayo, 17 points, 8 rebounds. Neither of them have brought it at all. Tyler Hero's been horrible for the most part in this series, only 9 points. He hasn't given them any sort of lift like he did last year in the playoffs. Duncan Robinson had a big game 1. He only had 2 points last night. They put Dragic in the starting lineup to try to get something going. That didn't work out. Miami, They look tired because they had,
They do.
they really picked it up at the end of the season. Uh, they just look overmatched. Milwaukee's just a better team, top of the bottom. We thought that they had a better team last year, and Miami upset them, if you want to call it that. And Milwaukee, to their credit, took this offseason and in the middle of the season, because they got PJ Tucker, they made a move to get him too, and said, we're going to tweak our roster to counter what went wrong in the playoffs for us last year or the past 2 years. And I think they've done a great job of doing that. And Miami is going to go back to the drawing board this offseason with a lot of questions, just like the Celtics are going to go back with a lot of questions, because they've been thoroughly outplayed in this series.
Yeah, the only difference is I don't think it's from lack of effort. It's a lack of talent. With the Celtics, it's been lack of talent, but also lack of effort. Again, maybe because Brooklyn, when they're clicking on all cylinders, good luck against them. I mean, they could put up 150 if they so choose. They scored 40 points in the first quarter the other night against the Celtics. I think they had 25 points in the first 6 minutes. I'm like, they're on pace for over 200 points. And they could keep that pace up if they decided to. You just don't need to in the postseason because you've got another game in a day or two. So that's going to be a fabulous series. And again, I've said before, if the Lakers don't win the championship, because I got to see my guy get his 5th championship in LeBron, and my argument gets stronger that he's greater than Michael Jordan. I've already made that declaration, but most people push back against that. But if the Lakers don't win it, the team I'm rooting for is Milwaukee. I don't want to see Brooklyn win it because then Durant would have a 3rd championship and they'll say he's better than LeBron. Philadelphia would be an interesting story, but there's always that rivalry, Boston, Philadelphia. And certainly the Clippers, they look like they're as disinterested as the Celtics in going down 2-0 at home.
Yeah, which is pathetic.
Against the Dallas Mavericks.
Pathetic.
Yeah, that's a team that needs a full lobotomy.
But here's the problem I have with Miami. The last note I'm going to give on them. They need a true scorer to join their team. They can't score. I mean, and Milwaukee can put the clamps on you defensively. I think they're the best defensive roster in basketball.
Right there.
And pair that with a team that can't really score. They don't have a lot of guys who can create their own shot. And that's why you end up with 84 points in a 2021 NBA game, is because Milwaukee's good defensively and you can't score. Not a good combination.
No, Duncan and Hero can shoot from the outside. Dragic can, work his kind of magic because he's kind of a crafty player. But yeah, they don't have a knockdown scorer.
There's a reason why those 3 guys aren't all-stars. I mean, no, Dragic made it once, but
made it once. And Jimmy Butler, we love Jimmy Butler, but he's not a guy that's going to go get you 30 on a nightly basis. That's not his game. He does everything out there. But yeah, they could use a score. And again, it's a free agent destination. If Kawhi opts out, Miami might not be a bad option for him if he decides to opt out of the Clippers. Because I have a funny feeling if this Clippers team gets swept, Steve Ballmer's going to go into the locker room and flip out, and
maybe
players might say, "Let me get the hell out of here." And I would think they would try to move Paul George. My conspiracy, not a conspiracy theory, my rumor would be Paul George to Portland for CJ McCollum and something else. I think that would be a good trade for both teams because both of those teams need to shake things up.
They might just do it even. They're not that far apart. I think George is a little bit better, but McCollum seems to be, more of a confident player than Paul George.
Jed, I think I'm more confident a player than Paul George. I mean, he's got all the physical skills you want. He just sometimes doesn't act like he's one of the best players in the league. But that would be an interesting trade because McCollum would probably fit better with Kawhi if Kawhi stays with the Clippers. And look, Dame Lillard's the alpha in Portland. He needs a true number 2 guy, and Paul George might be that guy, but that's for the offseason.
All right, let's go into this, your Lakers game, Sap. As like I predicted, the Lakers would have no problem with Phoenix. They controlled this one for most of the second half, I'd say. And really what the story again was Anthony Davis, unlike in game 1, was dominant in this game. 34 points, 11 rebounds. And Phoenix doesn't have an answer for it. They didn't get Chris Paul is, I don't know what percentage he is, but it's less than 50. Booker was not good enough last night. He also got ejected late in that game. And Ayton has probably been their maybe most consistent player.
Probably been the best player, except on the defensive end. He's a liability there. I mean, he doesn't really defend the pick and roll. The Lakers scored every basket of theirs in the third quarter in the paint. That's when LeBron got ultra aggressive and decided to go to the basket, where he's pretty much unstoppable. I think the greatest driver of the basketball in the history of the sport, and he showed that in the third quarter. Anthony Davis was unguardable. So DeAndre Ayton does a nice job, decent rebounder, really good on offense because he's got a nice touch around the basket, has some nice moves, keeps that ball high up in the air, which you try to teach all the bigs. Not all, follow through on that, but he's got a lot of skills. He's just not very good on the defensive end. And we see why Anthony Davis is one of the 5 or 6 best players in the world when, healthy and focused and motivated. He's impossible to deal with. And then you got LeBron. And then I thought Dennis Schroeder had a really nice game. If he plays to that level, they're going to be tough to beat because the other guys, KCP, who hurt his knee, and Kuzma couldn't buy a basket, but he got some rebounds. You just ask those guys to kind of fill in the gaps. But I've said this a million times. 2 things the Lakers do pretty much every night: play defense and rebound. That's their calling card. It's like a football team that plays good defense and can run the football. Now you're just hoping the passing attack is up to par. The Lakers were 7 for 28 from 3 last night, and they still won going away. I mean, if they ever start hitting threes, they're going to be a really tough team to beat. I feel confident now. You've been confident since the start of this series. You said 5 games. I still think I give Phoenix a puncher's chance, but in one game, I don't think they can come back and win the series. Chris Paul's playing at probably 40%. And that's not an injury you can recover from in the playoffs. You're going to get bumped at some point. And if you're the Lakers, you're a pretty smart organization. Dennis Schroeder or someone's going to be banging into him. And Chris Paul plays to contact. He's not just a guy who stands out on the perimeter. He gets in. He's
been a detriment this series.
He has been. He was minus 20 last night, Jet. Minus 20.
He's hurting them.
Cameron Payne hasn't played poorly. He got hot in the fourth quarter. I'm like, this guy's going to bring him back. He cut it to 8 with a couple of threes. Chris Paul's great on the court in terms of his knowledge, but I don't care if you're Einstein out there. If you can't shoot and pass and dribble, you're a liability.
Yeah. So, what I was texting you when I was angry last night is that it's just Phoenix was such a fraudulent team. And I know the series isn't over yet, but I've said it's been over for a while and it is over. It's not that good of a team. It really isn't. Their record is far better than the team indicates. And ESPN and Yahoo and NBC put out their lists of, who can win a championship. And everybody said, oh, Phoenix and Utah, they could do it this year. No, they can't. I know what a championship team looks like in the NBA. This is not what a championship team looks like. It's not that different. The way this bracket is working out for LeBron and the Lakers is not that different from the stuff that he faced in the Eastern Conference. This is a little bit of an unusual first-round matchup, and that's more difficult than what he typically would have faced in the East in the first round when he was dominating the Eastern Conference every year. But from there on out, it just gets easier and easier for them. So I don't want to hear, and I said this to you in a text, about LeBron's really hard road to the finals. I don't think this is that hard of a path. Phoenix had a good regular season. The record was nice. I'm looking at the roster. It's not that impressive. It's really not.
Well, it's not because Chris Paul's hurt. I think if he was healthy, the Lakers would probably still be up 2-1. They are better. They're bigger.
I said 5 games before he was hurt, Sap.
Right. And I said 6 because I do respect Chris Paul. And I may have overrated Devin Booker after game 1. I do have a tendency of doing that. I was comparing him to a poor man's Kobe when he's just not that. There's I don't know if there's anyone in the league that's a poor man's Kobe, has that type of killer mentality with that skill set, but he's a nice player.
Only 19 last night. I mean, that's not going to get it done.
And he got frustrated at the end. He's pushing Schroeder. He gets ejected. Then they throw Jay Crowder out, who's getting into a pissing contest with LeBron. I don't know why LeBron got into the pissing contest with Jay Crowder. I thought it got kind of foolish at some point. He did make one nice move for a basket. There were a couple other times where I think he hurt the team. And I'm talking about LeBron. And the one thing about LeBron, by far my favorite player ever, love him to death. I will criticize him when necessary. I thought at times he got selfish in the fourth quarter, which I like to see him get selfish because I think that's, maybe his only weakness is he's too much of a team player, but they had a big lead. I think he could have just eased into a victory rather than turning it into that pissing contest with Jay Crowder. And Phoenix actually kind of got motivated and got back to 8. Not that they were ever really seriously in the game, but in the NBA, couple threes and all of a sudden now you've got a 1-possession game. But overall, the Lakers are just big, aren't they? I mean,
that's why the first game was so weird where they got out rebounded. Last night they won 52 to 35 on the board.
They're not going to get out rebounded. Who's going to out rebound them in a series? I mean, it could happen
in one game.
I don't know how it
happened in game 1.
No, I don't. That was just they were asleep. Anthony Davis was asleep. LeBron, as he does in game one of a series that he feels confident they're going to win, kind of feels the team out. But that team is huge. I mean, Drummond, he's a flawed player, but the guy can rebound. I think he's in the way a lot, but Anthony Davis is more comfortable playing at the 4 than the 5. And one thing the Lakers did last night, you could put out a big lineup but not play big and still fire up too many threes. The Lakers last night went big with Drummond, Davis, and LeBron up front, and then they played big. The Lakers, I think, are at their best when LeBron's driving the basketball, because then he's going to score at will, get into some sort of rhythm that can carry over to his perimeter game, but also open up things for the other shooters of the Lakers who, quite frankly, haven't shot well in this series. If the Lakers can hit 38% of their three-pointers, they're going to be tough to beat, not just in the Western Conference, but in the finals as well.
Yeah. So the wheels are falling off in Miami. The wheels are falling off in Phoenix. Lakers are looking strong. Obviously, the Bucks look like they're maybe headed towards sweeping the Heat. And in one of the most competitive series last night, we saw the Nuggets come out on top in Portland, 120-115, in a good game that will henceforth be known as the Austin Rivers game.
Yes.
Where Austin Rivers decided to take the fourth quarter and go absolutely ballistic from 3. He finishes 5 of 10 from the 3-point line with 21 points. But as usual, this game came down to the two, superstars in it. Nikola Jokic, 36, 5, and 11 for him. Dame Lillard on the other side, 37 points, 5 assists, 2 rebounds. And those guys continue to battle it out. And this continues to be a very intriguing series. But the thing that, like I said, Seb, that gave Denver ultimately the lift enough to win this game was Austin Rivers in a start. By the way, he's starting on this team. He was waived by the Knicks and then out of the league for 2 months.
Yeah, he was sitting by his phone for 2.5 months waiting for a call, then got a 10-day contract with Denver. And one thing about Austin Rivers, he's never shied away from big moments at all. I mean, if anything, he's maybe too confident for his skill set, but he's not afraid to take big shots and be out there in big moments. I think he played pretty well with Houston last year in the playoffs, did some nice things. He's a nice piece to have.
I've always thought he was an underrated player. Not, he was the number 1 recruit in high school. He hasn't lived up to that. He was a lottery pick. He hasn't lived up to that.
No.
But he's not a guy who should be out of work for 2 months in the NBA. He's a good player that can play, obviously, meaningful minutes in a playoff game.
You don't think he would help the Celtics? I mean, he's better than they've got guys coming off the bench right now.
Everybody off their bench, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you and I could help the Celtics at this point. At least we'd give a care. I'd probably suffer a major coronary 2 trips down the court, but I'd give it an effort. But with Austin Rivers, he's always in a tough spot because of his dad.
Yeah.
So when he played with his dad, it was nepotism. Because he's in the league, it's nepotism. No, he's an NBA player, and we saw that last night. And good for him. I kind of always root for him. He seems like a good kid. And this series, I think, is going 6 or 7 because, again, I don't think Denver's quite good enough to blow out Portland. I don't think Portland's quite good enough to blow out Denver. It comes down, Dame Lillard's going to have to win games on his own. I think that at this point that Nikola Jokic has a little better supporting cast than Dame. Wouldn't it be cool if these two teams merged, though? Imagine a team with Dame Lillard and Nikola Jokic and then all those other parts they have. That'd be a Western Conference contender. The Lakers would still beat it. But they're both flawed teams, kind of like the Hawks and the Knicks in the Eastern Conference. That's why I think those are going to be the 2 longest series here in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense. And I think there are major flaws to their roster.
Yeah.
And I've talked about this since the beginning of the season. They both made errors in not trying to get James Harden because they would be right in the thick of it instead of, okay, whoever gets out of this will just, lose in the next round to the Lakers.
Yeah, which is going to be the case. Whoever wins this series plays the Lakers. The Lakers beat both of these teams last year in 5 games in the Western Conference. So maybe that path is opening for LeBron to get back to his 11th NBA Finals.
It is, Sap. It's not a difficult path. I don't want to hear it. Enough of LeBron's path. Easy path.
Yeah, kind of like Tom Brady all those years in the AFC, right?
Well, those at least are one-off. You
True.
could play poorly. When you have a 7-game series, you can have a stinker of a game like the Lakers did in game 1 in the Sun series, and it doesn't really matter.
Well, LeBron, if it was a football player, would have a bad first quarter and then right the ship from quarters 2 on, kind of like Bill Belichick's done in his Super Bowl run with the Patriots. 9 Super Bowls with Brady, they've scored 0 touchdowns. That
Yeah.
just blows my mind. And actually, Brady needed to get away from Belichick to actually score first quarter Super Bowl touchdown. He did that last year to Rob Gronkowski. They both needed to get away from Belichick to do that small accomplishment. But yeah, no, this is opening up for LA without question. And back to Portland. Yeah, that's a great basketball city. I mean, you went to school out there. It's got a great fan base. They've got a superstar that they love in that city, in Dame Lillard, who appears to love playing there. Like I don't see Dame Lillard anytime soon being the guy who goes to management and say, "You got to get
No,
rid of
but
me. I
time's
can't take
running
this
out
anymore."
there. They got 2
It
more years
is,
of this. 2 more
yeah.
when
That's
he's
why
at his prime.
That's why these teams have to be proactive, Jet. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
we went back to our earlier conversation about the Celtics with the Marcus Smart situation. You got to be proactive. And if you're the Portland Trailblazers, you got to do something in the offseason. You know, if it is trading CJ McCollum for Paul George, and again, you know, maybe you have to give up a little bit more because I do think Paul George is the better player. But I think now you put Dame Lillard with Paul George, that might be a nice combination because now there's some pressure off of Paul George because I think Dame Lillard's one of the better leaders in the NBA.
Yeah, for sure.
I really think he is. He's, you know, I always put LeBron, Steph, Dame Lillard, Jimmy Butler. I put there. He's just not quite the caliber player of those guys.
And Paul
Especially on
George
the
no longer
offensive
playing
end.
at home. You know, I think there's pressure for playing
There's
for,
pressure there, and it may have
your
happened
home
with
team.
Kawhi too. Although we never know about Kawhi because he shows no
He doesn't
emotion
feel
and
pressure.
doesn't speak. He's a cyborg. But I wouldn't be shocked if Kawhi at the end of this goes, this guy Steve Ballmer was a little bit too much, and you know,
Maybe.
I'm going to move on, and you know, he can opt out and sign with maybe the Knicks or whoever. But yeah, that's going to be an interesting series, and we've got, you know, some pretty interesting games tonight, including your Celtics playing the Brooklyn Nets. I don't know how interesting that's going to be, other than we're going to just monitor what the crowd does when
Yeah,
Kyrie
so
touches the ball.
let's wrap up these games last night. The first game is going to be 7:00. The Knicks and the Hawks in what is probably going to be the most competitive series, either that or the one we just talked about with the Blazers and the Nuggets. The Knicks and the Hawks are at 1 game apiece. Game 3 is now in Atlanta, where the Hawks are favored by 4.5 points. Sap, give your pick.
The zigzag says take Atlanta because the Knicks covered last time. I see a lot of close games in this series, but I'll go with Atlanta. I think whatever crowd will be there will get them pumped up. Maybe Julius Randle will play better than he did in the first 2 games for the Knicks, being away from the Garden. Let's not forget, most of the games this year were without any fans in the stands. Right. All of a sudden, you get to the postseason and there's 15,000 Knicks fans just absolutely jacked for that game. Maybe it's unnerving for some players, but I'll go with Atlanta. According to the zigzag, I'll lay the 4.5.
Yeah, I'm going to take Atlanta with the points. I think they win this guy by about 8 to 10 points.
Okay.
I like Atlanta's roster better, even though I picked the Knicks in this series. I still am going to stick with the Knicks, but I think this is a game that Atlanta takes after losing the last one. Yeah, I think being at home will help them. They're a younger team. I think it's nicer to, you know, those role players play better at home. And if they can get them going, Atlanta should win this game. So I'll take them. All right, the 8:30 game, unfortunately, is the Celtics and Nets. That is Brooklyn up 2-0. They are in Boston now. Kyrie will get booed. The Nets are favored by 8. I'll go ahead and spoil this and give my prediction first. The Nets with the points all day. Take it. The Celtics have yet to play competitive against this team all year long. So 8 would be, I think, the lowest margin of victory for Brooklyn on the year.
This line should be like 12 or 13, right? I mean, there's obviously a major talent gap between the two teams. One seems locked in, ready to win a championship. The other one looks like it wants to go home. The Celtics don't have their second best player. Kemba Walker is questionable for tonight's game. So, you know, Jason Tatum can go out and score 45 and they still could get blown out. The zigzag says take the Celtics +8 because they didn't cover the last game. So I'll take the Celtics +8 for no reason other than the zigzag, because your mind would say Brooklyn's going to win this by 20 points. The thing is, in gambling,
you're just taking the points though, right? You're not taking the Celtics.
No, I don't think they're going to win. No, that would shock the hell out of me. But I'll take the Celtics plus the points based on the zigzag. And also, in gambling parlance, when everybody agrees on something, go the other way, because when people agree that much, they're generally wrong. They don't build those big casinos on the backs of winners. They build those casinos on the backs of losers. I'll take the Celtics +8 in this game. Keep it somewhat close, or maybe get that haunted backdoor cover where, Brooklyn's up 14 in the final 2 minutes and Celtics hit, Aaron Naismith hits a couple of threes to cover the line or something along
Yeah,
those
I
lines.
could see that happening, but I
Yeah.
I feel pretty confident saying the Celtics will get blown out for the what would be the sixth consecutive game against the Nets. And man, it's just been this is a rough series. This is the
It's
last
not a
thing I
good
wanted to
matchup.
happen.
It's not a good
No,
matchup.
no, it's not.
In addition to being a matchup of, arguably the best roster, at least the best big three in basketball against a depleted roster. That's bad enough. But even if both teams are healthy, it's a bad roster for the Celtics. They just don't have answers for
No,
Durant, Kyrie,
It's just
or Harden.
miserable.
It's a bad matchup.
All right, we'll end with the Clippers and Mavericks. The Mavericks, surprisingly, everybody is shocked by this. They're up 2-0, and now they get to go back home and play in Dallas. Though for some bizarre reason, Sap, it is the Clippers who are the 2.5-point favorites in this game. Go ahead, Sap, give your pick.
I'm just trying to figure out, the Clippers are favored in this game. Again, it's a must-win game for them, but so was game 2, and Dallas beat them by 6, and Luka was brilliant again. Clearly, Luka's the best player in this series. He doesn't play defense like Kawhi Leonard, but maybe it's not that far apart because Luka's just destroying the Clippers, whether it's Kawhi, Paul George, Pat Beverly, whoever they put on him. He's manhandling. He's scoring and also assisting the ball. Dallas is shooting 3-pointers at a very high rate in the series, over 50%. I don't know if that keeps up, although they are going home. The Clippers, I think, are the most overvalued team in the NBA when it comes to point spreads. I mean, they are considered like the best team in basketball in terms of what Vegas says about them. Last year in the postseason, they were favored by more points over Denver in the second round in those games than the Lakers were favored over Denver in the Western Conference Finals. And we know how those series ended. Again, based on the zigzag, I got to take the Clippers and lay the 2.5 points. Although it doesn't seem to make any sense. I'll be rooting for Dallas because I want to get the Clippers out of the playoffs because they are the one team out west. As poorly as they've played in the postseason the last 2 years, they still concern me a little bit that they could possibly beat the Lakers. Although the more I watch, I do agree with you. The Lakers are going to be in the finals. So I'll take the Clippers minus 2.5 points at Dallas. It makes no sense, but neither does the Celtics +8 make any sense. And according to Zigzag, you got to be very disciplined, Jet. That's what I'm picking.
Okay, I'm going to stick with I'm going to stay with the Clippers as well in this game. I think this is their last stand. I think they lose the following 2. I mean, I'll see how they play tonight, but I think they'll lose the following 2 after that. So I do think they win tonight. So I have no problem taking them with the points there, the 2.5. Not obviously it's desperation mode, but they have enough talent to be able to take a game on the road.
Yeah.
And I think Dallas will maybe play a little bit looser now that they've won those 2 games. They know they have those in their back pocket. They won't have to play with such intensity. And I think the Clippers are going to win tonight. So I have the Nets, the Hawks, and the Clippers tonight. And Sap, you have the Nets winning, but the Celtics covering.
Right.
Bad decision. You have the Hawks winning and covering. Yep. And you have the Clippers winning and covering.
Yeah.
All right. Those are our picks. That's our show. This is the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. Check out our Twitters. We'll make it nice and easy for you to find the link at JohnSap25. That's 25. And at Jet Striar, JETSTRIAR, which is also the YouTube version of the show, youtube.com/Jet Striar. Same spelling. All right, everybody. Enjoy the games tonight. If you're a Celtics fan, try not to be too miserable. I can't really speak for myself. I'll be completely miserable, but don't be like me. Do what I say, not what I do. And enjoy your weekend, everybody. Yeah, it's Friday. Enjoy your weekend. See ya.